Okay, so everything that we learned up to this point, this keyword, the constructor functions, the prototypes, the inheritance, everything, we are actually preparing ourselves for ES6 or also known as ECMAScript 2015. Now, in this video, we will learn about ES6 classes and subclasses, and what they actually are. It's the same thing that we did up until now, but it's written a bit differently and a bit easier. So it's called syntactic sugar because under the hood, it's basically the same thing. Now we'll start up with ES6 classes, which, as I said, also known as ECMAScript 2015. And a class is a type of function, but instead of using the keyword function, so let's just go down here. So we would use function and then give it a name with a capital letter. We will now use, instead of function, the keyword class. And now comes the difference between constructor functions and classes, because the properties are written in something called a constructor. We use the constructor keyword, and within parentheses we will now type first name, last name. So our arguments go inside here. Now, a construction method is a special method for creating and initializing an object created within a class. And the construction method is called each time the class object, this one right here, is initialized. So let's just go down here and create our const with Norbert again, and we'll say new user, and we'll pass in the first name and the last name. Now, exactly as we did before, we also need to pass in our constructor this keyword for first name and for the last name. Actually, this should be between curly brackets. So within our constructor, we will call this first name, and we'll assign it to first name. We don't need this. And this dot last name, which will be assigned to last name. Now, as soon as we call here Norbert, console log Norbert, we'll get exactly the same results as we did up until now. Now let's type in here a comment. So properties prop go into the constructor, and underneath our constructor we'll now create our first method. The method in ES6 look a bit different. We just give it a name for an anonymous function, so we don't even use the function keyword. We just say get full name and open and close parentheses, and then between curly brackets we will return example this dot first name and this dot last name. Last name, there we go. So now if I would go down to my console log here, Norbert, and I would run the method get full name, we'll get Norbert Menghart, exactly as we did before. Now let me just cut that out. Now if we take a look in our user object and on the proto object, you can see that we have the constructor method from the user class. So it basically works the same as it did in ES5, excepting we have now a class of user here. And you can see the method is also in here. So yeah, it's basically the same. As I said, it is basically the same. It's just written a bit different. For example, for the method, we didn't have to give it a name and then use the function keyword. We just called the name and then open and close parentheses, and then this is already a function. So this is how we create our methods. Now, for example, if we want to create another one. Let's say we create that experience method again. Let's go down here and let's create another new user. So const, let's call her Laura, new user, and let's give her a name, Laura, and it should be a capital L. Then Manhart. And now let's go up here and insert a new argument. So let's say we also want her to have a starting day. So started. And we'll later on give her also a permission. So just type it in here. Now we need to also include it up here. So this dot started is equal to new date object, and within here we'll call started. So we'll pass in the argument in here. Now let's go down here and create a method for experience. So let's say experience open and close parentheses, go down here. Let's say let day, actually today, is equal to new date. And then we'll create a const with difference, and we'll subtract from today the this dot started dot get time. Now the difference, we need here n const, there we go. Now the difference from the subtraction we'll catch in another variable. So let's go with const and experience, and we'll assign this to a new date object again, and we'll pass in the difference. Now if you console log now experience, let me just show you how this looks, and we need to run the method. So this dot experience, and we get it undefined because we didn't pass in anything for Laura. And actually we want to go with this dot Laura, and now let's say she started 4/30 and 2017, and this should actually return. We will also need to return this console log. Now we need to return the experience dot get UTC fall year, which is also a method, minus 1970, and I will also need to wrap this into parentheses and call the math object and dot absolute. So it doesn't matter if you get a negative or a positive number, it will always give us a positive number from this. Okay, and I also want to display it as years. So the string of years, and then we'll use another math object dot absolute, and we'll pass within here experience dot get UTC month. I also want to have the months, so not only the years but also the months. So hours, month, there we go. Okay, so now we got 3 years and not a number because we got the method. So 3 years and month. So 3 years and 3 months. So if I would just change it here, let's say to 5, we get 3 years and 2 months. And if I would change it to 18, and it basically stays the same. Well, increase the month. Okay. So next up, let's create a change permission function. So first of all, let's give her a permission. Let's give here Laura a permission of what kind of permission should we give her? A student. Let's give her a student permission. So student. There we go. So if I would call the entire, actually I could run this up here. Just need to include it in our class. So this dot permission is equal to permission. Okay, now close this and go down here and call Laura's permission. Okay, she's a student, and if I call the entire object of Laura, first name, last name, permission. Now let's change the permission. So we go inside our class and create a new method called change permission. And we just take this dot permission. So it's exactly as we did before. And we'll assign it a new permission, which will be an argument which we need to pass within our change permission function. Okay, so all we need to do now is go down to where we created Laura and grab onto Laura and say dot change permission, and we need to pass in the argument. And now from a student, she's an assistant. Okay, so now if we console log Laura and take a look in here, Laura is no longer a student, she's a assistant. So now let's just create another user for a bit of exercise. So Arabella is equal to new student, a new user. So let's pass in a name, Arabella, first name, last name. Let's say she was hired on the 10th and 2010, and she is a assistant. Okay, and she's a assistant manager. Now let's go down here, call Arabella, okay, so there's our user with Arabella. And now let's start calling all the methods. Let's say get full name, then get, let's actually get her experience. So experience, we need to close this. She has 9 years and 9 months of experience. She has a permission just permission. I keep deleting my last parenthesis. Amazing. Assistant manager. So now let's change her permissions. Let's go up here and say Arabella dot change permission, and we're going to change it to manager. Okay, so now if we console log her permission, she's now a manager. Excellent. Now I want to do something different, and let's include up here in our constructor, not in our constructor, in our class, underneath the constructor, down here, a static method. And a static method is a bit different from the other methods. They are defined on the class itself and not on the prototype. So you can see here in our first one, in the proto, we have change permission, constructor experience, get full name. Okay, and that means you cannot call the static method on the object of Norbert, Laura, or Arabella, but only on the class. So this means that the static keyword, so let's go here, static method, and we'll just call it static. So you use the keyword static, and then let's say vacation days left. Okay, and we'll pass in here actually two arguments. I will call first of all on an x, and I will assign it to 30, and then a y, which we will need to pass in. Now within here we'll just return a x minus y. Okay, so if we will go now down here, so now if I would go down here to, doesn't matter which user I would choose, let's say console log, so the user, so we need to call, as I said, the class itself, the class of user, and now we'll call the method vacation on the class of user. And for the first value, because it's already passed in, I would pass in 30, I would now pass in undefined, and then the value of 2, and we should get 28 because it's 30 minus 2. Now if I would change this value to, let's say, 10, then it's 10 minus 2, which is 8. Okay, so as you can see, the static method only runs on the class itself. I cannot call it on, let's say I try to call it on Arabella, so vacation days left, and call the method here, and you can see Arabella vacation the days left is not a function. Okay, so that's pretty much it for classes. Now let's take a look at subclasses, and they're actually pretty easy. So now if we would just create here another class of student, and let's create a constructor function. So let's create our constructor down here, constructor, and let's pass in a first name and a last name. And down here we'll call them this dot first name is equal to first name, function first name, and this dot last name is equal to last name. Okay, so now that we have our student constructor, and let's also create a method, for example, get full name. So let's return a welcome. Just call it this dot first name, and then we need this dot last name. So now if I would create a student, const student, let's call him Bernard, is equal to new student, with the name of Bernard, and the last name of Manhart, and let's call him, so console log Bernard, Okay, we got our Bernard, and let's maybe comment all of this console logs out. Don't need this anymore. So we got our student. Okay, now let's say I want to create now a teacher class. So let's go down here underneath our student class. So let's create a class of teacher. And now I want to extend the student to the teacher class. So we'll use the keyword extend student. And now within here, within curly braces, we will create a constructor. And we will pass in here first name, last name, a email, not dot, but comma, a email address, and a access. So first of all, we will need to call the first name and last name from the student, and we will use the keyword super. And within here, we'll just pass in these two, first name and last name. So they're already called. We don't even need to use the keyword this in here, as you can see. And now let's just call this. Actually, we're going to leave a bit of space here so you can see the difference. This dot email. Now we're calling the two arguments from our teacher class. So this dot email is equal to email, and this dot access is equal to access. So now if I would call, I should create first a const, let's say David, and David will be a teacher, so we'll create a new teacher class, and David will have a first name, David, last name, Manhart, a email of David at, let's pass it into the string, so David at mail.com, and he will also have access of admin. Now let's just say teacher, not admin. We'll change it then later on. Okay, so if I would now call here David, as you can see, if you take a look in our proto, the student of Bernard is proto of object, and it has this get full name method already assigned to it. And if you take a look in our teacher, it has a class of teacher, and it has no method assigned to it. So if I would call on Bernard get full name method, it will get me Bernard Manhart. If I call it on David, although it doesn't have the method assigned to it, it takes the method from the student. Okay? So let's also create a static class now in the teacher. So static, and we'll call this monthly, because teachers need to park somewhere. So let's say monthly, I'm missing here an N, monthly parking permit. Okay, so this is a static function, and this will return 70 plus a string of dollars. Okay, so let's go now to David, and let's see. Actually, not on David. Static classes need to be called on console log on. First of all, let's try the teacher dot monthly parking permit, and let's call the method, so $70 needs to pay. And if I would go now and call it on the user, the student, well, we will get undefined because it doesn't inherit backwards the static method from the teacher. So the student class remains without the static method of the teacher. Okay guys, so that's pretty much it for classes and subclasses. So see you in the next video. Bye bye.